So thank you again to those who are joining. We have the stream started, but we have not started the actual webinar. Please feel free to let us know who you are in the chat, what sector you work in. We're running a poll as well, and also turn on your preferred language using the interpretation feature at the bottom.
Oh, shoot. Oh, shoot.
Hi, everyone who's joining again. This is Megan from the OGP. We are waiting to get started at the top of the hour, but in the interim, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. There's also a live poll that hopefully most of you can see, so go ahead and take the poll as well. We'll share the results shortly. And also take note of the interpretation feature at the bottom of the webinar where you can select your preferred language that you will want to hear. Especially for panelists who are joining us now, it's very important that you select your preferred language at the bottom so that the interpretation feature works when you speak. So I'll just do a few more reminders here at the top of the hour. We will get started in just a few minutes with Helen as our moderator. We are sharing some poll results, and you can see that we've got heavy representation from South America and Europe, as well as North America. I think given the time zone that we're in right now, lots of people in Asia and Africa are asleep or heading there. You please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from, what sector you're coming from. Please also use the interpretation feature at the bottom. So this applies to panelists as well as attendees. Please select the language that you want to hear as an attendee, and as a panelist, please select the language that you plan to speak. We will be promoting all of the panelists to the co-host status so that they can mute and unmute themselves, as well as turn on their cameras. So we have a slide up right now, but after the introductions, we will have everyone's cameras visible. So Helen, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Megan. By my watch, we're still a few seconds off the hour. So I'm going to wait till we're right on 21 hours over here in Madrid. I think we've got the recording running now, right?
Yes, we're recording and we're live streaming on YouTube.
Okay, fantastic. So we are recording and we're live streaming on YouTube. Welcome everybody to this very special webinar as part of the OGP, Open Response, Open Recovery Digital Forum, looking at how we keep governments open during the coronavirus pandemic, but also how we try to ensure that, to the extent that we can, we take the opportunity to not only defend, but to expand open government during the response phase. This particular webinar tonight for the next 1.5 hours is on keeping information and data out of lockdown. And we are privileged to have a really excellent group of specialist speakers with us. So I'm just going to run through and introduce them. And then I am going to just say a couple of words of introduction, and then we'll get straight into the substantive presentations. So first we have, I haven't actually seen her yet. Yes, Ana Maria Musa, joining us from Zagreb, I think, the former Information Commissioner of Croatia. You can just say hi.
Hi, hello.
Hello, Ana Maria. Great that you could join. And then we're going to Toby Mendel in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Canada. Welcome, Toby. Do we have Eduardo Bertoni? Not yet. Okay, although I see some of his colleagues are on the call, so probably he's about to join. Philip Tigo from the government of Kenya.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Philip. Where are you? Are you in Nairobi?
I'm in Nairobi, yes.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
And now, I guess, from right around the other side of the world, Paul Stone from Stats, New Zealand.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning. It's rather funny because at 8 o'clock this morning European time, I was on a conference call with 2 of your colleagues who are about to go to bed. So you've taken over from them. That's great. Agustin Frizera from Democracia en Red.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Agustin, welcome. Where are you from, coming in from?
Buenos Aires. I'm speaking.
You're in Buenos Aires, fantastic. And we should have Anya Calderon from the Open Data Charter joining from London. Anya, you are there.
I'm here. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
Fantastic. Great. So, oh, and Eduardo is there as Agostina. I see. And we can't hear you, Eduardo. You're muted. And I don't know if I can I unmute you? Try now. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Ah, yes,
Can you hear me?
now, yes.
Okay, I will change my mic and I will come back. But I'm here and I was here when you introduced me. So
You were fine. I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't see you.
no problem, no problem. I will change the mic. Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, fantastic. So we've got a really excellent panel. I also will mention, coming in his personal capacity, Fernando Florindo Rejon from the Council of the EU, who's been working, will tell us a bit later about how he's been working to keep access to information requests flowing during the lockdown. Welcome also, Fernando.
Hello, good evening to all of you.
Good evening. I would ask all the speakers to put yourselves on mute when you're not speaking. A couple of housekeeping rules. Megan may have said them at the beginning, but I'll repeat them. We do have interpretation into Spanish and French, so that you can listen in one language, or you can skip between languages if you do that. For our speakers, it's really important to note that when you speak, you must have your settings set to the same language as you speak in. So if you will speak in Spanish, have it set to Spanish. If you will speak in French, have it set to French. and English to English. Otherwise, we mess up the interpretation. I'd like right from the outset to say thank you so much to Megan Wallace and Bianca Nelson and everyone at the Open Government Partnership Support Unit for getting this set up and the whole Open Response, Open Recovery Week. I didn't introduce myself, I realize. I'm Helen Derbyshire, for those who don't know me. Hi. It's fantastic to see so many people from all around the world, literally all around the world, joining this very important discussion. I'm here as someone who works on the right of access to information, running the organization Access Info Europe, based in Madrid, from where I'm joining you in the early evening in Madrid. I'm missing my evening stroll. And I'm also here in my capacity as one of the 11 civil society members of the Open Government Partnership Steering Committee. And just to recall, for those of you who don't know, the Steering Committee of the Open Government Partnership comprises 11 civil society representatives and 11 governments. And we work together to oversee and help promote and advance the work that the Open Government Partnership is doing. And this event is taking place in what would have been originally Open Government Week around the world. So it's a substitute, and it's also, we changed all the plans for Open Government Week because of the particular context in which the world finds itself right now. The objective of this call, of this webinar, is to discuss the challenges that we face in maintaining open government, as many countries have gone into states of emergency, as people are in lockdown or confinement, quarantine, whatever you call it, and people are working from home. So it's very important to discuss the challenges that that poses, both for responding to requests for information and publishing data and information proactively. But we also want to focus very much on the opportunities, on how we can ensure that in this moment we do not only defend the right of access to information, but we also actually take steps to lay the groundwork to advance, to increase levels of responses to requests, to improve the infrastructure, and to increase levels of publication of data in open formats. I think that one thing that has happened in these last few weeks, which sometimes seem like much more than a few weeks, but in the last couple of months, is we've seen the amazing appetite that the public has for information, and also the challenges of getting correct, accurate, comprehensive, complete information, data to the public in a timely fashion. It's been a huge challenge for governments. It's perhaps laid bare some of the problems we have with data collection, with lack of disaggregated data, with lack of systems for collecting information and getting it rapidly online and disseminating it through other means so that it reaches all sectors of the population. So I think that we've exposed some of the challenges which we as a professional community knew that we already had, and I'd like to address that. But also, how can we propose solutions which will ensure that as we move forward, coming out of this pandemic, which will take a while, I think, and moving on from it, hopefully in the not too distant future, how do we ensure that we don't forget the lessons that we've learned, and that we set in place mechanisms which allow us to increase levels of openness. So with that, those words of introduction, I'd like to turn to our first, we've divided them into blocks of speakers. We'll have 2 speakers in the first block, which will be about 20 minutes. Short interventions, I've asked for 3 or 4 minutes. Let's see what we can do. And if to the extent you can, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. And I ask everyone, I might need some guidance on this. Megan, the questions will be put into the chat, is that right?
Yep, questions should go into the chat.
Okay, so I'm trying to monitor the chat while I'm listening to you. It's a bit of juggling here, but I'll do what I can. I've got colleagues on the line helping as well. So if you have a question, be specific and clear. Thank you very much. Megan is going to help with the questions. Wonderful. So Let me go first, as I've got it here, to Eduardo Bertoni, Director of the Information Agency in Argentina. Welcome, Eduardo, and could you tell us a little bit about what you've needed to do in these first weeks of the state of emergency there in Argentina and your vision on things? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Can you hear me now? I changed the mic. Yes? Okay, perfect. Thanks again for the invitation. And thanks, Helen, for your introduction. I was expecting you to introduce me in Spanish. I know that your Spanish is perfect.
Lo siento.
No,
La
no, I'm
próxima
just
vez.
kidding. I'm just kidding. And I will move to talk in Spanish. I don't know if I have something specific to do. If I start speaking Spanish.
You should make sure at the bottom of your screen that the little icon for interpretation is set to Spanish. So move your mouse over the bottom of the screen. Look for the little globe.
I don't have anything in the bottom. I have something.
Do you have a globe that says Spanish?
I am using an iPad. I'm not sure if I have that button.
Megan, can we help there? Switch Eduardo to Spanish.
I'm sorry about that. I can do the presentation in English, but since I am speaking in my official position, I prefer to speak in Spanish, as always I do. If it is not possible.
Eduardo,
yes.
Do you have like 3 dots?
Yes, I have.
And if you click there, can you see the interpretation?
Language interpretation. Yes, I put in Spanish.
Great, yeah.
Okay. ¿Ahora está bien? Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias. Voy rápido porque tengo muy poquito tiempo. Quisiera compartir con ustedes, en función de lo que me invitaron a compartir, sobre los desafíos y las necesidades inmediatas, y voy a ser muy breve para dejar lugar al debate y a mi colega de Croacia también. Yo diría que como desafíos los resumiría en 3 desafíos. El primero lo voy a poner con un título que es No parar la rueda. El segundo es ser realistas y asegurar derechos fundamentales. Y el tercer desafío es no opacar la caja de cristal. Y me voy a referir a cada uno en particular. ¿Qué quiero decir con no parar la rueda? Estamos frente a una situación en la que muchos gobiernos han, por razones absolutamente atendibles, han mandado a cuarentena a todos los empleados públicos, y esto ha traído como consecuencia que los procedimientos administrativos ante la función pública, ante los gobiernos, están suspendidos. Esa suspensión lleva a que las personas no puedan ejercer muchas veces derechos. El problema es que estamos frente al ejercicio de derechos fundamentales, como es el acceso a la información. La suspensión de los procedimientos se puede traducir inmediatamente como una directa suspensión de un derecho fundamental. Entonces, no parar la rueda para nosotros significó que hiciéramos una resolución específica que dice que, a pesar que los procedimientos administrativos para peticionar ante las autoridades en la República Argentina están suspendidos, no está suspendido la posibilidad de hacer pedidos de información y los trámites que en consecuencia se puedan hacer, por ejemplo, los reclamos ante la agencia. Decidimos no parar la rueda del ejercicio de derechos fundamentales. El segundo es ser realistas para asegurar derechos y asegurar al mismo tiempo derechos fundamentales. ¿Qué quiero decir con esto? Se relaciona con el anterior. Nosotros seguimos tramitando pedidos de información y hemos dicho que los pedidos deben ser cumplidos en los plazos de la ley. Todos los que estamos aquí sabemos que en todas las leyes los plazos de respuesta de información son plazos cortos, así lo establecen los estándares internacionales, pero tenemos que ser realistas. En algunos casos puede ocurrir que una información esté en una oficina pública que esté cerrada por un tema de cuarentena y de la pandemia, y que pueda hacer que no se pueda encontrar esa información en el plazo en el que esta está pedida. Bueno, Desde la agencia, para nosotros esto es un enorme desafío, porque queremos que se cumplan con los plazos, pero a su vez tenemos que ser realistas. Y si hay un sujeto obligado, si hay una parte de la administración que nos demuestra que esa información está en una oficina que está cerrada y que el personal no puede entregar esa oficina, hace muy poco la Cancillería Argentina, si literalmente la cerraron el edificio por un tema de coronavirus, nosotros tenemos que ser lo suficientemente pragmáticos como para poder hacer algunas excepciones en esos casos. Por eso yo digo, ser realistas, pero asegurar a su vez el ejercicio de derecho. Y el último tema, que yo decía, no opacar la caja de cristal, siempre hemos dicho que la transparencia activa transformaba al Estado como una suerte de caja de cristal en donde todo se puede ver desde afuera hacia adentro. A mayor transparencia proactiva, mayor información activa que da el Estado, más información pública que está a disposición, menos pedidos de información, mejor cuidar la caja de cristal. Bueno, en los tiempos que vivimos es posible que muchas de esas, y hablando justamente en un ámbito de gobierno abierto, muchas de las actualizaciones que son necesarias para la información proactiva que el Estado pone a disposición empiecen a sufrir algún grado de retraso en las actualizaciones, que no todo lo que antes estaba ahora está, y que se empiece a opacar un poco esa caja de cristal y no podamos tener suficiente transparencia activa, suficiente información otorgada proactivamente como consecuencia de la pandemia, de la emergencia sanitaria, y el desafío para nosotros nuevamente es controlar que eso, en caso de ocurrir, ocurra de una manera muy excepcional, porque en el caso nuestro, de la Agencia de Acceso a la Información Pública en Argentina, también controlamos cierta información que obligatoriamente los sujetos obligados tienen que poner en sus sitios. Esos son los tres grandes desafíos que yo he querido compartir con ustedes. Seguramente hay muchos más y muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Eduardo, por poner una estructura tan clara sobre los desafíos que tenemos. Gracias. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to Ana Maria Musa, former Information Commissioner of Croatia, with whom I've had the pleasure to work in various countries around that region. Who's also, I know, has joined a previous call that we have for some of the RTI experts in Europe and has been doing a lot of thinking on this issue. So Ana Maria, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. So my part in this today's meeting, which I'm glad to participate in, is to say what I think about the current challenges on transparency. And my opinion is basically based on my personal experience as Information Commissioner, but also from some discussions I had with the commissioners and the employees of the commissioners' offices in the region. So basically, many things were said already. So, but I will just focus on two issues here. So one thing I want to say is that this crisis has put a tremendous pressure on transparency, and in two ways. So one way is this operational way. So the way the public administrations and governments are responding. So as we all are aware, so there are delays, there is a problem of capacity of public organizations, basically because not all people are employed at the same, are not physically in the offices this time. And of course, records management has proven to be very weak in some countries, in some organizations, and not yet up to the level you would expect in 21st century. So all these issues can affect the speed, basically, in which public is receiving the information, which now is very crucial. The second thing here is the general culture of transparency in different countries. So I would say that developing countries, young democracies, are especially vulnerable in this crisis. And of course, in this operational part, I would also want to emphasize that that one of the crucial factor is what is the thing that open data is still not present, is not a standard in all public administrations. So we have seen now that it is precisely the open data that we need in times of crisis, because it allows us comparisons, it allows us, and when I'm saying us, I mean the public, any part of the public, but also for those who make decisions. So what we've seen now is the pressure from civil society organizations, from media, from academia, and all these subsectors, I would say, are now cooperating as much. I mean, they're never cooperated so much as now. I can say that from academia right now. So we have many groups discussing many issues. So everything is online. We don't have to travel anywhere. We can all be in the topic all the time. The same is in business. I've heard that in many businesses, there's also a kind of cooperation to put pressure on government to disclose information, to say, when will you open the borders? When will we be able to work? So there's a demand for information, which is the greatest, I mean, ever, I would say. And at the same time, there's a response in government, which can be basically, which is not always appropriate. So one thing is that maybe we are now focused a lot on health information, or information which is connected to this crisis. We might lose focus from this. We might basically forget that there are many other issues going on in public administrations, and as civil society organizations and academia, we still have to demand transparency in, I don't know, public procurement, organizational employment in public sector. Anything that is really always in the focus of those who are perceived as watchdogs of the public sector. But the second thing is here, and it has been mentioned so far, is that given the fact that this crisis has allowed governments to restrict freedoms and citizens' rights, it is very, very dangerous now to allow governments to restrict the access to information on the basis of extraordinary circumstances. So in my opinion, it is really in the rare and very, very specific cases when these restrictions would be acceptable. So it cannot be basically just to be sure that public is not taking some information in the wrong way or something like that. So the thing is that the level of transparency and the communication has to be not maintained, but even improved in compared to pre-COVID times, I would say. So basically, constitutions in many countries prevent governments to just, easily take a carte blanche and, do whatever they want without rights. So basically, they have to be aware that there's only really a small portion, a small possibility of to restrict the rights and freedoms of citizens. So in that way, I would say that the hide and seek game is not something we can tolerate right now, especially right now. So I would say that to finish, I would just say that the cooperation of civil society organization demands for information, especially the information which might not seem to be of such importance right now, and the work of independent authorities, from commissioners, ombudspersons, and media, of course, is something we really need to put focus on and maintain the flow of information, or even improve it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Anna Maria. And you've emphasized some really important points there, including the threat to the advances that have been made in recent years in relatively young democracies at this time, where the culture of transparency is not so deeply implanted, perhaps, and there is a temptation to roll back on it. And another point that you made, I think, is very important, is the nexus that we're seeing right now between the right of access to information and the proactive publication of data and documents as well. It's something I think many of us and many of the speakers on this call probably already recognized, but there's sometimes been a little bit of an artificial divide between the access to information community on the one hand and the open data community on the other hand. That's why we very much wanted to do this call with the Open Data Charter. It's great to have Annie. I see Annie is smiling as I speak. So to the extent that there is a very high demand for information, the real response to this demand needs to be not by answering single information requests, but by ensuring that that information is made public proactively. And also, yes, the cooperation, well, this is part of the cooperation, and that is very important, that we've been able to use the digital tools that we have to come together. And I guess one of the challenges right now is to really harness all that cooperation so that we get the clear messages to the governments and ensuring that we bring in different sectors that are information hungry at this point, including different sectors of civil society and also the business community is really important. It's about health data right now, but it's about a lot of other sectors of society are affected and need information as well. Okay, so let's see. Do we have any questions? I'm slightly surprised, although maybe the first two speakers were so comprehensive and clear. I'm trying to read the last. There's comments coming in. I see a comment from Marius Lucas Ionas from UNESCO there. Do you see room for setting new standards aimed to support the right of access to information on the intergovernmental level, or do you see the current international framework is sufficient? That's a really good question, Marius. Also, just to note that UNESCO is the body that is charged with overseeing states reporting on the Sustainable Development Goal 16.10.2 indicator, which is on the right of access to information. So the question is, do we need new standards, or is it a question of enforcing the existing standards? Anna Maria, you're nodding, so I'll go to you first.
Yeah, well, I was nodding because I'm also asking myself the same question, whether it will lead us to new standards. But first, I mean, I personally would like to see the existing standards enforced. When it comes to intergovernmental cooperation or regional or international initiatives, for example, the Council of Europe Convention, I don't know if it's, I mean, it's been 12 years, whether to actually, I don't know what to say, but I personally I tried to put pressure on our government to sign the convention and to ratify it, but I didn't make it. I know that many colleagues are also done the same. But I would say that we all know the standards right now. But maybe the priorities could be changed, or maybe some nuances could be made. For example, one thing that comes to my mind is the standard of equal position of all requesters. Now, with media requests and civil society requests for really, really crucial information when it comes to health or when it comes to emergency, might be in some occasions considered as being a priority because it affects all I mean, the citizens as a whole, society or the community. And the other thing is open by default. I think that now in 21st century, especially now when we've seen both at individual level and organizational level that we can live online. I mean, I'm not that happy in general that we are moving to virtual life, but we can communicate, we can have everything online, even work from home, but we never thought we could, and be closed for months in our apartment. So basically, I would say prioritization when it comes to the information that affects the society as a whole, or even global community, we've seen that some information was also, not available when which should have been available. So one thing, and second, open by default. I think that now it should be number one standard.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the plug for the open by default. And I think that the idea that the existing standards are there, but they're not yet sufficiently respected is something that's really important. And ensuring that instruments like for those in the European region, the Council of Europe Convention on Access to Official Documents, which needs one more country to ratify it so that it comes into force, is something that we really should push at this point. I'll put that question to you, Eduardo. You've also got a supplementary question about whether the users, I guess the access to information users, have changed their behavior. Maybe I've heard reports from some countries, including from everywhere from, here in Spain, in Bosnia, in Chile, that there's been more requests since the crisis started. So if you want to comment on that as well, very briefly, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Eduardo, I think you are on mute, so we can't hear you.
Gracias, Helen. Sí, no, ya está. Pensé que tú me lo levantabas, Helen, pero está bien. A ver, primero una cuestión sobre los estándares internacionales y después sobre la nueva forma de la utilización de este derecho. Yo primero, francamente, creo que los estándares, un poco en la línea de lo que tú decías, Helen, yo creo que los estándares internacionales que hoy tenemos son robustos y suficientes y sería bueno que sean realmente cumplidos. Pero cumplidos todos los estándares. Cuando hablamos de estándares internacionales tendríamos que granular un poco a cuáles nos estamos refiriendo. Nos estamos refiriendo al principio de maximum disclosure, de máximo acceso. Sí, eso tiene que seguir vigente. El de plazos breves, el de autoridades independientes, el de no discriminación. Yo creo que, no sé si estoy si es un poco lo que dijo mi colega de Croacia, o estamos en algún grado de desacuerdo. Yo no creo que hay que discriminar los pedidos de información dependiendo de quiénes vienen, porque eso es un slippery slope. Puede llevar a que ciertas personas, digamos, por ejemplo, los periodistas tengan mayor acceso que los que no son periodistas, y en eso tenemos activistas de derechos humanos que pueden necesitar la utilización de este derecho de la misma manera, y podemos volver a reeditar una enorme y muy antigua discusión que era si el acceso a la información era una herramienta solamente para los periodistas, cosa que hemos dicho por muchos años que esto no es así, es un derecho fundamental y lo tienen que ejercer todos. Entonces, yo creo que los estándares internacionales que tenemos son lo suficientemente robustos. Creo que el trabajo de UNESCO en el cumplimiento de algunos de estos estándares a partir de los ODS es importante tenerlo en cuenta. Y yendo a la pregunta, francamente nosotros hasta ahora, pero todo, digamos, inclusive es por una cuestión también de plazos y por cómo funciona nuestra agencia, que es nuestra autoridad de control. Nosotros hasta ahora no hemos notado algún cambio sustancial en mayor pedidos de información sobre algún tema específico. Por supuesto que lo debe haber, no estoy diciendo que no lo existe, pero nosotros no somos los que recibimos los pedidos de información. Los que reciben los pedidos de información son los distintos ministerios. Entonces a nosotros nos van a empezar a llegar, ya algunos pueden estar llegando, reclamos por, ojalá que sean pocos, no entrega de información. Y ahí podríamos hacer algún tipo de análisis. Yo creo que es posible que se esté utilizando las leyes de acceso para más enfocado en temas vinculados con la pandemia, pero no lo puedo afirmar en Argentina, no lo puedo afirmar en este momento. No lo descarto, me parecería intuitivamente razonable, pero no tengo un dato empírico como para decir que esto esté ocurriendo.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Eduardo. I'm going to move on to the next block to try to keep strict about the, is that right? 34. No, we still have time for a couple more questions. No, we don't. We have to move on. Sorry, just checking my timekeeping. We have to move on. We're now going to move to the block 2, which is about innovations and short-term solutions. So what can be done in the short term, although we've already heard, for example, what was done in Argentina. And we're going to start with Philip Thigo, who's the Senior Advisor on Data and Innovation at the Legislative and Intergovernmental Liaison Office in the Government of Kenya. Philip, it's great to have you on the call. I would just say from the first poll, we've only had 34 of the participants vote in the first poll, but we currently only have 3%, one person, in fact, of our participants from Africa, which is a little bit disappointing. A full 50% of participants are from South America and 30% from Europe. So it's good to have your perspective, and I'd love to hear what you've been doing, including perhaps in response to some of the challenges, Philip, that were raised in the by the first two speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I think the sort of African lack of representation is also because it's 10:35 p.m. So you can imagine it's kind of late. So I think I've had the first speakers, and maybe to put this into context, Kenya has about 581 confirmed cases, about 173 recovered, and 26 deaths. This is something that I think is put online proactively by the government. And I think in terms of setting the tone, the President and the Minister of Health actually, on the day on March 11, where we had our first case, actually made a public pronouncement that the fight against COVID is an all-in effort, and anybody who is a friend of Kenya or Kenyan can quickly get into the committees that are being set up or part of the ecosystem to respond. So we've had an overwhelming kind of all-in effort by everybody, and that's, for me, is the first piece, is that the government must be very open and transparent that this is a difficult pandemic, and so how do you ensure that you create a multi-stakeholder ecosystem to support that? So we did that. We have a National Emergency Response Committee that is multi-stakeholder, including civil society. We have a COVID response fund that is largely led by private sector. And so I think for me, that in itself, we see that as an innovation. So the whole multi-stakeholder ecosystem of it. The second thing, of course, is understanding that COVID is a location-based pandemic. So then how do you ensure that the issue of data becomes central to that? A quick example is that we are not on a full lockdown. We are on a partial lockdown based on data. So Nairobi, which is a capital city, and one of the cities, the coastal hubs, Mombasa, have been on a lockdown. Specific suburbs today were put on a lockdown because of data and seeing those new infections. And what the government has been very good at is having the president or the minister make those pronunciations, but saying why. And that's why in our case, we've really not had either public upheavals or things like that. And I think for me, that's really the issue. So the kind of innovations, of course, that we've been part of is putting together a digital collaborative. So it's been an all-in effort, whether it's the big tech companies or local innovators running challenges and seeing how to support or ramp up government capacity. But then that brings, I think, the challenge around lack of investment over a long period of time. But also it comes at the back of skepticism and lack of trust of government. So it doesn't matter whether you proactively release information or not. You already have a citizenry that does not really trust what you say. So then it simply means that you cannot build trust overnight. So how do you ensure that this opportunity of COVID becomes that potential of co-creating democracy where you build trust and people can trust on the information that you actually give, and understandably that, and I'm sure the three participants from Africa would tell you that our internet is dodgy and not many people right now are online, and yet COVID has created a technology-enhanced world. So how do you ensure that you still are proactively releasing access to information and ensuring that data is open with weak technology systems and weak data systems? And so I think for me in our case, it's simply about how do we then rethink our investments beyond the brick and mortar of roads and rails to internet infrastructure, which now for us is a right. So how does a majority of population, for example, place access to information requests when the commission or the ombudsman is also safe distancing? it means they have to put something online. So if you're not online, then for sure you cannot get a service. And some of these access to information requests actually are under our life and liberty sort of component of the law, which requires 48-hour responses. So then how do those MDS, I think, respond? So I think for me, that's a challenge I see, and those are the kind of innovations we are thinking around, because the future will be digitally enhanced. So how do you ensure that government also remains that? So I think the quick takeaways that I see, an example is Mzalendo, which is one of the civil society organizations working with Parliament to ensure that Parliament remains online but oversees national government. And Mzalendo, being that organization, also ensures that the sort of online Zoom conversations are put into formats that citizens can actually engage with. So again, it simply says that you must have those mechanisms already in existence to be able to quickly recontour them and pivot them for people for COVID-19. So I think my takeaways are these ones. Countries without foundations of democracy and mechanisms, I think, will have a difficult time. And maybe it's time we rethink that so that we can repurpose those mechanisms for emergencies. The second thing I think is not about setting new institutions. How do we innovate with existing ones? And I think for me, it's about building capabilities, but also capabilities must be hinged on how you engage citizens in issues that matter most in their lives. Whether complex or not, COVID is very scientific, but how do you ensure that you make them simple so that you can implement and measure them and everybody can measure them? And I think for me, it's again an opportunity for dialogue. And that's what we are seeing in Kenya. And for us, we're seeing that as an opportunity to innovate, whether it's tools and platforms, but more or less it's really about people. And how do we ensure that we create an atmosphere of engagement, regardless of the challenges we're having?
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Philip. That was extremely interesting. And it's also very important that you've brought in that other dimension of we've got a lot of focus on transparency here, but the other dimension, pillar of the Open Government Partnership, which is participation, engagement, co-creation. And it's fantastic to hear that you're actually doing that as part of the response, that you've been able to mobilize perhaps the existing ideas that you had or the existing structure for citizen engagement in order to bring diverse actors into the response. That's very important, and it highlights the link between transparency and participation. And another point that you mentioned, the evidence-based decision-making as absolutely essential to trust. We've seen declining levels of trust in various surveys and polls, really across the board in many regions of the world, in many countries over recent years. So getting that trust back through openness, that's definitely something that we work on at the Open Government Partnership, and really sharing data so that people can understand how the decisions have been taken and why. And the fact that you've been able to do that with differentiated lockdowns is a very interesting case study. There may be some more questions for you on that. Thanks. I'll move now to our next speaker in this section, which is Toby Mendel at the Center for Law and Democracy in Canada. Toby, thank you very much. And just to say, giving it a plug, that today the Open Government Partnership launched a little mini version of the Open Government Guide, which has had contributions from various people, including Access Info Europe, the Center for Law and Democracy, and the IFDI in Georgia. I think we've got someone from IFDI on the line. So a link's been put into the chat, but given that we've got a lot going on in the chat, we'll make sure that you get it in a summary message afterwards. It's on the Open Government. There it is again, the guide, the most recent item in the chat. Some thoughts for how to keep government open during this crisis and in recovery. So Toby, thanks very much, and over to you.
Thanks very much. I was just saying I'm going to, and then I change it. I'm going to be unmuting myself so people can actually hear me. I'm going to be very practical in my points, sort of very specific things that I think governments can do. And I'll talk about 3 areas. The first is on proactive disclosure. And I think you've already heard this from some of the speakers. Obviously, governments should give very regular, at least daily updates. Others, including IDFI that you just mentioned, have published lists of what they feel should be included on this practice. I won't spend time on that, but obviously we need a lot of information updated regularly. I think better practice at this time is for leading politicians, especially health officials and senior politicians, to give daily briefings. And interestingly, in much of Canada, we have seen a massive drop in the number of requests because journalists at least have direct access to the top political leaders every day, and they can ask them anything at all. So they've kind of moved to that direct exchange of information as opposed to requests. So we're sort of interesting in that. And I think the third point here is that now access to information really can be a matter of life and death. We sort of, we make that comment sometimes a little bit glibly, but really today that is true. And so we need governments to explore ways to sort of the last mile in terms of getting information out there to make sure that everyone is getting the information and especially the most vulnerable people. And hopefully new solutions can be found for that. And then after this crisis is over, those sort of last mile systems will still be used to get information out. So I think that could be a bump up for RTI from this. Secondly, when it comes to reactive disclosure, our position has been that there should be no general measures of restriction. We understand that governments have some constraints at this time, but we don't believe in general measures. So for example, it would be legitimate, we don't think it's legitimate to have a general extension of time limits. Rather, there could be a facility where justified for public bodies to extend time limits. But each extension should be justified. We cannot, we've seen lots and lots of countries saying, oh, the time limits are suspended or the time limits are elongated. We don't believe that's legitimate. We believe that the principle of RTI remains in place and that each extension would need to be justified. Lots and lots of government departments are not slammed at this time, while some are. So if you're slammed and you can't focus on that. Then I think in terms of positive measures for COVID-related requests, I think that kind of information, and I'm going to enter a little bit into the debate that the last panel had about sort of some special measures and special groups, and I think that not to detract from the existing standards, but to put in place better standards, faster, more comprehensive responses for COVID-related information. So faster and definitely prioritizing journalists and civil society groups that will directly use that information, especially to serve accountability purposes, because our accountability systems are down while our need for accountability is up. So we need those RTI to be filling in a little bit on that. Any legal changes should be as short-term as possible. Where you have a law, so it's difficult to pass laws at any time, and it's especially difficult now. So where you have a law authorizing changes, we believe that the specific RTI changes should be in regulations that could be updated every couple of weeks. So the law may authorize RTI changes, but they should take place via regulation, which can be done every 2 weeks. We're seeing this thing move very quickly. We're seeing some countries starting to come out of it, and any restrictions should come out at least as fast as that. And then lastly on that, it's very, very important to keep the oversight bodies going. We've seen oversight bodies in some countries are just closing down. Eduardo, of course, represents the Argentine oversight body. He's still going to work. Those bodies need to keep going, because if we get refusals, we need to be able to challenge those. And then thirdly, in the digital space, and here's where I really see benefits across the board, potentially from COVID, we are upping our digital fluency and also just our digital systems. So hopefully we will see public bodies taking advantage of that to move forward in terms of the digital processing of requests, getting more bodies using digital systems, getting more facility in releasing information in digital formats. We have a slightly bizarre situation here in Canada that when they send you electronic information, they often put it on a CD-ROM, which, I mean, in my organization, no one has a computer that can read a CD-ROM. We have to have external drives for that. And so that's how out of date that kind of thing is. Maybe we could move forward a little bit on that. And then my final point on the digital sort of somewhat fitting into the digital thing, is that, and Anna Maria also mentioned that, you know, the record keeping is suffering a little bit. We are seeing an enormous number of decisions being made in new ways, often by webinar rather than by meetings, and the paper trail is not as strong as it was before. I understand that because the decisions need to be made quickly, and people aren't in the office and whatever, but we certainly need those things to be recorded. So, I mean, we're recording this webinar. Governments should certainly be recording their webinars, and that should be forming part of the digital space. I will, if you permit me, just make one final comment in response to Marius's point, and I won't enter into the debate about standards, although my view is that there's a lot to be done to improve international standards. But I would note that international organizations are one of the real weak spots globally on access to information. National laws have been getting stronger and stronger, and of course not every country has a strong law, but anyway, there has been, I think, strong progress in improving those. But intergovernmental organizations still, by and large, have very weak policies. And not to kind of throw brickbats, but UNESCO, which is leading globally on this issue, has a particularly weak access to information policy of its own. So I think that we really need to see improvements on that. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much indeed, Toby. So yes, if to the extent that we've got standards, we need leadership on implementing those standards, including from the intergovernmental organizations. And even in a country like Canada, where I believe that there is also a right of access to the internet, if I'm not wrong, that you still have challenges with the way that digital is used. And in response to what Philip was saying about perhaps this crisis has created, how do you phrase it? You phrase it very nicely. COVID's created a technology-enhanced world. Well, let's hope so. Let's hope it helps us enhance the technologies that we are using or should be using. I've got one extra special guest speaker this evening, joining us in his personal capacity, but someone who works on the access to information systems at the European Union level. We have Fernando Florindo Gijon, who is the Council of the European Union sent out a notice a couple of weeks ago saying that they are continuing to process requests. I have to say that in Western Europe, that's quite exceptional, because in many Western European countries, certainly in Spain and in France and in some others, the emergency legislation automatically suspended all administrative timeframes, and the right of access to information has been swept up in that. So it was a very nice positive piece of news to see that at the European Union level, things were still continuing to function. And I wonder, Fernando, if you could tell us briefly about that, and how's it been going, how you're managing to do it, because I know you're all working from home. Over to you. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Hello to all of you. As mentioned by Helen, I'm certainly talking of my experience in the council, but at the same time, it is my views, not necessarily the position of the council. And three topics I wish to mention quickly, or to share with you my reflections. I mean, probably the first, which some of you have already commented, it is this focus on information, and that certainly the efforts now, at least in the council, have clearly moved to providing more information, in the sense of much more regular updates of the web page, of the information, proactive information that is put in the web page, much more data, infographics, the reference to other web pages, and trying to develop all of this, which probably reflects, in my opinion, a change also in the demand of the public, probably during the crisis. My personal experience is that, surprisingly, for the access to documents request, they have remained more or less steady. I mean, it was we expected an important decrease in the number of requests from citizens, but it is not at all the case. We are receiving more or less the same, similar. What has changed is we are receiving much more requests for information, which in our legal framework have a different status and go through a different procedure, but it is much more the public requesting information in general, not explicitly access to documents, and particularly on COVID has been a huge increase, which shows a different tendency, and we try to adapt and try to provide all of this information proactively because there is clearly a demand of the public. So it was my first experience. The second is, as Helen has mentioned, we have certainly, I mean, we started, I think it was on the 17th in March with the quarantine in Belgium to work from teleworking, working all of us from home. But we have managed to respond more or less on reasonable, similar deadlines that usually, and within our deadlines, and more or less no important delay. Probably only I would mention 2 cases, but very peculiar, which is the request for documents concerning classified documents that we have difficulties to access to them remotely, but it is probably the only case. And one of the other cases is decisions that have to be taken at the council level, I mean in the ministers, that it is true that the decision making in the council has slowed a little because of the crisis, and so sometimes it takes a few days extra, but it is no problem. I checked it this morning, and more or less after the quarantine, more or less we have received around 300 requests for access to documents. Approximately half have already been answered, and the others will certainly be soon. So it is not a big delay, or we are not taking a delay in answering to citizens. And I imagine that the access, without having figures, I imagine the usual percentage of documents released has not changed. It is more or less the same. But the third comment I wish to mention is linked to this decision making of the council, and at least, and I don't know if it is purely because of the intergovernmental nature of the Council of the European Union, or it is more general, but certainly what has happened with the crisis and with all of the teleworking and the ways of working is that the working methods have changed. The decision making has really changed a lot in the last. Toby Mendel just mentioned the problem of the paper records that are reducing, and this is clear that is happening. You have much more informal meetings, much less formal meetings because people cannot travel, cannot come, we cannot convene meetings, so it is very, very complicated. So the way of working of the council has changed radically in a few times, and we are struggling to apply the transparency rules that were based on a different way of working and how to change it. I mean, just to mention, just for a practical issue, I mean, we part of the most important information were the minutes of the meetings, but there is no meeting. It was the voting records, but there is no vote because everything is decided by written procedure. We have been obliged to immediately we keep on producing voting records, but which are, let's say, different because they do not correspond to a real vote. They correspond to what member states have notified in writing. But we prepare fish the vote, what we call in the jargon, just to try. For the minutes, more or less the same. We are creating a sort of record to try to cope with this problem, to provide similar information adapted to a way. But it is not always easy, and we are still, I mean, we are in this process of reflection, how to cope with a way of working which certainly has much less paper record. Because probably it is temporary, I don't think this will last, and it is probably we simply need to adapt. But certainly it is one of the most important developments that we have to find solutions, and we are trying to do it. Thanks a lot, and this was my reflections.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Fernando. That was very useful to hear that perspective and some of the practical issues that you're facing. Generally, you can process requests, but not classified documents. I think that goes back to what Eduardo was saying about being reasonable. There will be some difficulties that you don't normally face. The issue of record keeping is a really important one, and I'm glad it's being raised. There's been a little debate going on in the chat. Joe Powell from the support unit had raised, from the Open Government Partnership, had raised a question about government procurement. Mukalani Dimba, I saw that you're citing a couple of examples there. I haven't had time to read them to know exactly what they say. We just put in, my colleague Rachel has just put in the chat a link to a document that we published, a set of 10 recommendations that Access Info, the Open Contracting Partnership, and some other NGOs published a couple of days ago, in which we, amongst other things, look at the problem of the very rapid decision-making that is taking place on procurement. It's legitimate to have emergency procurement where you bypass the normal procedures, but the problem is the way it's being done by phone calls, by emails, by WhatsApps, by video conferences, etc., means that there's a huge risk of not having the paper trail. Whilst much of the procurement is being done in good faith, there are risks of corruption. And for those working on accountability afterwards, that could really create difficulties. So the obligation to keep a record, which is a precondition for having access to information, documents, and data, is something that I think that we need to emphasize at this point. We've only got a couple of minutes left in this block. I really wanted to pick up on one thing that Toby said, which I feel may be controversial. So I'd like to ask any of the speakers who've spoken thus far, including Anna Maria and Eduardo, or the others, to react to this, which is the idea that journalists and civil society should perhaps have their requests, if I understood you right, should have their requests fast-tracked, which is something that we do try to resist recommending generally. So I wonder if that all requesters should be treated equally. So I wonder if anyone would like to react to that. Eduardo, adelante.
Sorry, I was on mute. Me estaba sacando el mute. No, creo que es un poco lo que dije antes. Me parece que aún en esta crisis nosotros no podemos hacer discriminación de los pedidos. Yo no estaría de acuerdo en discriminar por quién pide la información, pero por una cuestión conceptual. Estamos hablando del ejercicio de un derecho humano. Y el ejercicio de los derechos humanos no puede discriminarse. No podría, yo no encontraría un fundamento legal en derecho internacional y en derecho local para discriminar los pedidos. Y por otro lado, tú dices, Helen, periodistas y sociedad civil. Hoy estamos en un mundo de, yo me animo a preguntar, ¿quién es periodista? ¿Es periodista el que escribe en un medio gráfico, en un newspaper? ¿O es periodista también el que tiene un blog que lo leen muchísimas personas? ¿Quién es civil society? Un académico es parte de la sociedad civil que por ahí necesita información que tiene el Ministerio de Salud para hacer una investigación. Yo querría ser muy enfático. Me parece que los pedidos no pueden discriminarse. Y es más, hay otra cuestión conceptual. Durante mucho tiempo dijimos que inclusive los pedidos podían ser hechos de manera anónima. Estaríamos subvirtiendo los principios si ahora decimos, bueno, el pedido de realidad le vamos a dar prioridad a tal o cual persona porque cumple tal o cual rol en la sociedad. Me parece muy peligroso. Abandonaríamos ideas del anonimato en los pedidos y abandonaríamos principios fundamentales como la no discriminación en el pedido.
Gracias, Eduardo. Anna Maria, would you like to comment on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I share Eduardo's concern about equality and anti-discrimination of the requesters. But here, I mean, I would say that maybe we should think about two issues here. One is that in some countries, there are, I mean, journalists have special position, even in the constitutions or in laws, special laws such as laws on media, granting faster procedure. This is one thing, and maybe different procedure, not completely the same as it is for the regular requests. I agree with Eduardo that now the issue of who is the journalist is open. I mean, this is for a debate. This is not that clear. But then I also suggested earlier that there could be additional, I mean, element if the information is affecting a larger number of persons, a group, especially if it's a vulnerable group or the community as a whole. I mean, all COVID-related information is now affecting everyone. So this is something. And also, one thing in Aarhus Convention, there is a 48 hours deadline for the requests relating to environment. I mean, environment is everything that is living. So basically, it could be also related to our health. So I mean, this is something we could also think about.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Yes, perhaps some laws do have them. I think, was it Philip or someone who mentioned the 48-hour timeline for requests that are about life, and so that's something that's really important. Did I get it right, Philip?
Yes, yes. Life and liberty. Yeah.
Life and liberty. That's it. Yeah. Thank you. Toby, do you want to come back on that point, since right to reply? You need to unmute yourself.
It's amazing how difficult it is to remember a simple thing like that. So just to respond to Eduardo's points, I don't think there's any problem with the international legal framework on this. Under international law, right to information is protected as part of the right to freedom of expression. That right may be derogated from or changed during emergencies. You're not allowed to discriminate during emergencies, but that discrimination would relate to discrimination on a prohibited ground, such as race, religion, gender. We're not proposing that kind of discrimination. So the term discrimination covers a lot of ills, and it's not that kind of discrimination. So I think it's perfectly legal. We would also, I would have to strongly disagree about the anonymous requests. No one needs to, I never said that requests should be suspended apart from those ones. I'm just talking about special fast, the 48-hour kind of idea. You can still make your anonymous request and go through the regular route if you don't want to expose yourself or to try to take benefit of that expedited request. When it comes to journalists, and I mean, we're you know, I said journalists in civil society, first of all, but actually any justification for special rights, freedom of expression of any sort, rights for journalists, in my opinion, can only be justified through the role that journalists play in carrying information to the public. So it's, although the journalist appears to be the beneficiary of the right actually vests in the public as recipients of information. Under international law, the right to freedom of expression protects both receiving and imparting information. And we have, for example, protection of sources. We especially protect journalists' rights to not disclose their sources, even in front of a court of law, because we need the source to talk to the public through the journalist, not because the journalist has some special rights. And it's exactly the same idea that is in play here. And I think that I mean, Anna Maria mentioned, you know, about the sort of public interest. I mean, I think what justifies all of this is the public interest. And final point, or two final points, I'm not only suggesting that we bias or privilege certain requesters, I'm also suggesting that we privilege certain types of requests. So I'm calling for two deviations from our normal flat earth approach to things. And I forgot the other point I was going to make.
I think we're going to have to really keep moving. Eduardo wants to come in. I'd ask you to be very, very brief, Eduardo, because I do have to move on to the next block.
Yeah, no, it's just to respond very, very briefly. I think that Toby is totally wrong, not partially wrong, in terms of international standards. And I will just read Article 1 of the American Convention of Human Rights, that is similar to the European Convention, to the Covenant, the ICCPR, and state party to this convention undertake to respect the rights and freedoms recognized herein, and to ensure to all persons subject to their jurisdictions the free and full exercise of those rights and freedoms without any discrimination for reasons of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, economic status, birth, or any other social conditions. Period. Toby, I'm sorry, you're wrong.
None of those relate to the profession of journalism, first of all. Secondly, we are not taking away anybody's right. We're simply expediting. And as I said, we're doing it for the whole public.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop this now because we've got to get on to the last section where we'll also have a bit more of a focus on open data. But we've clearly touched on something very important. It's come up in other conversations in the last few weeks. We had quite a hot discussion about it while we were preparing the 10 recommendations on emergency procurement. And we came to some kind of compromise where we said that, in fact, if journalists ask questions, for example, at press conferences, and get answered, that any data that they're provided with should immediately be put online for everyone to benefit from. So we were trying to find compromises where journalists do have their special forums for asking for information, but making sure that everyone else has the right to that. This is the reverse that we're talking here. I'm serious. I will propose that we set up another discussion to thrash this one out, because I do think it's important, and it's an example of where perhaps this crisis is throwing up particular points that different communities need to discuss and look at their position on. So that will be a very interesting discussion going forward. I also saw that Andrew Eccleston in New Zealand, hi Andrew, put a comment on this in the chat box about, does that mean the commissioners should prioritize these as well, speed up requests from journalists or civil society? What are the consequences of that kind of proposal? So let's make a note to discuss that. And without further ado, I'm going to move on to our third and final block before we have then the closing remarks from Ania from the Open Data Charter. So we have two speakers in our third block, and it's entitled Lessons Learned and Calls for Long-Term Change. And I'm happy to turn first to, good morning again, Paul, to Paul Stone from Stats New Zealand to talk about your perspectives on that. Thank you, Paul.
Hi, everybody. So I've got a couple of lessons learned, I guess, and it's building on what people have said already. So picking up on open by default and participation. And what I think the lesson that we've learned, certainly here in New Zealand and other countries, is that we are information by default rather than data by default. And that is linked to how people respond in a crisis. So what we've also learned is that people want to help. People want to find ways to help because that helps them cope with the crisis as well. And there are a lot of people out there, we've underestimated how many people look to data as a way of helping. So we wanted to see, what I can do is actually share on screen some examples. Okay, so this website is a great website. It's great information, and it's being updated daily. And New Zealand has a good picture of what is going on, detailed information. But it took some time and some negotiation to get the ability to download the data, because people wanted to take that data and to communicate it in a different way. Sorry, here's another example of, get the top of my, sorry. Get out of. So, all right, I'm just getting, because the things are in the way of me getting to the tabs. So this is a Treasury giving economic information, and that has also been released in PDF. And so people are screaming out for the data. And the people looking to get to the data are building dashboards. And the reason they want to do this is they want to communicate to people in a different way the information that they're getting. Here's another example. So the main reason, two reasons that people are wanting the data about what's going on is to be able to communicate to others in a different way to help more people understand what's going on. And the other reason they want data is to be able to help in the response, to help others to cope with the situation of lockdown. And in that light, we've had data that's not about what's going on now, but it's the open data that should be open before we hit the crisis. And it's what we've learned is that things don't change once you're in a crisis. You're not going to get new systems and processes. You're going to have to deal with what is accessible at the time of crisis. And so this is an example where people have taken census data and job market data and broken it down by like gender or ethnicity and different demographics to look at the impact of isolation on people and their jobs. And who are going to be the most vulnerable communities during lockdown, for example. Another example of using data that's already open to be able to help people is Wellington City Council created a map of where all the support services are located that you can access for mental health and other social services, shelters and so forth, as well as things like pharmacies and supermarkets and police stations. And then, building on that is the idea of actually, while we're in a crisis for a pandemic, it's going to go on for some time, and there could be other hazards that happen. So Landcare Research have done some work on taking census data and looking for vulnerable populations for pandemic, and then overlaying that with areas that are vulnerable to flood, as we're a country now in lockdown and moving into winter. So I'll stop sharing now, and just those examples really are highlighting that don't underestimate how much the people want to be involved and help through data, but also how important it is to be more data prepared for the next time, because we want to, people want to be able to respond and help people and rely on data being open before the event happens, because it's certainly not going to come out during the event. And that's all I'll share for now. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. I was just thinking while you're talking that you are talking to us from tomorrow, because it's already the 7th of May in New Zealand, if I'm not wrong. And I'm watching everything you've got set up. It really did feel like you're talking to us from tomorrow. So that was wonderful. The point about it will be in a moment of crisis, it's the systems that you already got in place that you're going to be using is terribly important. It's also really interesting to see the level of disaggregation of the data. This is a point that we always drive home, that the Open Data Charter, of which I'm also privileged to be on the board of, is always stressing that we need to have data that's disaggregated, and to see that you've got that and then are able to use that data in your response to this particular crisis is very interesting, and it's a very important lesson learned, I think. And also echoing what Philip was talking about, the readiness of people to get involved and to use the data in ways that will help them help their communities. I don't know if you want to just comment on my reflections there.
Yeah, oh no, that's absolutely right. So, I mean, I think this current crisis is an opportunity to learn that we need to be better prepared in terms of data, and we need to start now opening data for next time. Unfortunately, there probably will be a next time, but it just, you know, whether it's a pandemic or any other kind of crisis, we need to have the fundamental data about our population open. So statistics are really important, but also, as we saw in that last example from Landcare, there are other things that can happen, not just the crisis you're in, but things can compound. And so the more we know about land and our infrastructure is really important as well. And it needs to be accessible to anybody at the click of the fingers.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. We're being asked in the chat if we can have a link to what you presented. We will make sure that everything that's been presented, all the links are available in the the material we gather about this webinar afterwards. And we are being recorded, so it will be available to people to rewatch if you missed something. There's a bit of a
I've just posted in the chat a link to a document. It's got
posted
links,
it. Fantastic.
links to all of those.
In real time. Thank you very much indeed, Paul. There's a bit of a discussion going on in the chat as well about definitions. I won't go into it now, but clearly the whole question of definitions and how we count in order to make any kind of data comparable cross-country is very important, as is the way that data is stored so that it's interoperable. Let's go to our last actual speaker, which is Agustin Frizera from Democracia en Red, also in Buenos Aires. Over to you, Agustin. Thank you. Gracias.
Thanks, Helen. I'm going to speak in Spanish, so if you need to switch, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. Agradezco en primer lugar la invitación. Veo que han invitado a personas muy importantes y además me han invitado a mí, así que agradezco la deferencia. Mi intervención va a ser muy corta y va a ser quizás más general, porque lo que observo, no solamente en Argentina, fundamentalmente en la región, pero también en otros países, es que este contexto nos requirió una adaptación a nuevas lógicas de un día para el otro y sin preparación. Me parece que lo que esta situación muestra es que nuestros marcos normativos no están preparados para lidiar con situaciones como esta, o como decía Paul recién, con otro tipo de crisis que impliquen consecuencias como estas. Es difícil hablar de lecciones aprendidas, ¿no? Pero me parece que hay algunas cosas que son obvias. A esta altura, si Internet es la única vía de comunicación que tenemos con el mundo exterior en tiempos de confinamiento, Internet tiene que ser considerado un derecho humano, y esto ya lo dijo la ONU en su momento, fue declarado por mayoría y algunos países se opusieron, etc. Pero la resolución está. Lo que nos falta es que sea considerado por los estados como un servicio público esencial, y me parece que este contexto habilita a una discusión como esta. Porque además podríamos hablar, por ejemplo, en la Argentina hay un acceso de más o menos 90%, depende mucho más de la edad que de la condición socioeconómica, pero claro, se consumen datos por los que hay que pagar. Entonces también tendríamos que hablar de espacios de Internet en donde uno pueda conectarse con las instituciones, por ejemplo, para co-crear, que habiliten el zero rating, ¿no? Una práctica que usan las operadoras de telefonía móvil para no cobrar a sus clientes finales por el uso de determinadas aplicaciones, ¿no? Esto implicaría rediscutir, por ejemplo, la neutralidad de la red. Me parece que es una discusión que podemos tener. Creo que si nuestra vida transcurre a través de las pantallas, tenemos que hacer muchos más esfuerzos en materia pedagógica para atender a fenómenos de los que ya se viene hablando mucho, pero por cuestiones electorales, ¿no? Como las fake news, ahora convertidas en una cuestión de vida o muerte. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos para que la alfabetización mediática, la media literacy, ancle en nuestras sociedades y esas habilidades se desarrollen? Cómo priorizar fuentes de información, cómo evaluar la relevancia de una estadística, como mismo mostraba Paul. Digo, esa información hay que saber leerla, y no sé si tenemos sociedades, por lo menos desde nuestra región, preparadas para interpretarlas, para detectar la posible existencia de una falacia, o una falacia de autoridad, o el sesgo de confirmación mismo, para identificar interrupciones argumentativas. Hay mucha evidencia que confirma que cuando las personas conocen estas técnicas, suben su alerta frente a la posible manipulación en línea. Entonces esto se debería incorporar en los sistemas escolares. Este es un camino que ya están recorriendo Francia, Finlandia, muchos estados en la Unión Europea y algunos estados en Estados Unidos. No es de todas formas el de la juventud, si bien es un tiempo en donde se forman los prejuicios que después son un problema a la hora de interpretar noticias en la juventud, quienes más comparten este tipo de noticias o este tipo este tipo de noticias falsas o mensajes de intoxicación son los segmentos adultos, los mayores de 65 años, digamos. Eso está muy corroborado por muchísima evidencia de distintos países y no tiene que ver con el grado de educación, con la actividad general en redes, se explica en general con el bajo nivel de alfabetismo digital. A mí me parece que también podríamos hablar de ciertas habilidades que se tienen que desarrollar dentro del Estado para abordar dinámicas online. Yo pertenezco a una organización, por ejemplo, en la que hacemos software, en la que tenemos predisposición a la utilización de software e incluso estudiamos cómo se usa el software. Sabemos que la vida online no es lo mismo que la vida offline, sabemos que tienen lógicas diferentes, que no se puede plantear la vida online como un sustituto del offline, porque cada una tiene ventajas y desventajas. Les quiero decir que socializados como estamos en la utilización de software, nuestro trabajo nunca fue tan productivo como antes. Quizás no somos tan felices, pero nunca fuimos tan productivos como ahora. Y eso es porque probamos miles de herramientas durante mucho tiempo. Quiero decir que estas habilidades se ejercitan y que el Estado tiene que empezar a ejercitarlas. Los procesos de co-creación, incluso llevados al espacio online, yo no digo que tengan que estar específica y únicamente online, pero que deberían ya desarrollar ese correlato y que debería ser una parte sólida, es mucho mejor la discusión por escrito. Entonces, quizá para la co-creación sea muy ventajoso incorporar protocolos online. Organizamos, comentario al margen, organizamos un congreso hace 10 días, tuvimos 35.000 personas viendo. Hubiésemos tenido que alquilar un estadio de fútbol aquí en la Argentina para poder meter a esa cantidad de gente y la verdad, gastar en sonido, y la verdad es que tuvimos personas de 48 países con una infraestructura que nos costó $14. Digo, esto también para quienes ponen argumentos presupuestarios a la hora de decir no hay que comprar este software, no hay que invertir en software. Hoy estaba en una conversación a la mañana en donde se reflexionaba sobre el estado del Poder Judicial en la Argentina frente a la pandemia, y decían que como no hubo inversión en software, tenían que instalar los jueces en sus propias computadoras sistemas operativos viejos para que pudiera correr el software. Bueno, me parece que se invierte mucho en impresoras, en papel, en toner. Creo que la inversión en software debería ser jerarquizada incluso dentro del Estado. Voy a hacer un comentario más y lo dejo. Decía que desconfiaba de los aprendizajes, ¿no? Porque en general lo que estamos viendo aparecer es que contextualizamos en el medio de la pandemia y del COVID cosas que creíamos antes. En ese sentido hay que desconfiar y les pido en este caso que desconfíen de mí mismo. Yo creo que es indispensable que complementemos la participación ciudadana y los procesos de co-creación con dinámicas online. Creo que se puede hacer, creo que se puede entrenar, y que sepamos, de la misma forma que sorpresivamente tuvimos en un congreso organizado con $14, 35.000 personas, podemos tener mucha gente más en los procesos de co-creación de OGP, personas que quizás tengan un menor grado de intensidad en la vida pública, pero que nos van a traer puntos de vista fundamentales, son los puntos de vista que queremos, son los puntos de vista que necesitamos. Me parece entonces, como para resumir mi intervención, que tenemos que encajar la riqueza de los dos mundos, cada una donde corresponda, lo presencial con la riqueza de lo presencial, lo online con la riqueza de lo online, pero que esta vida a través de la pantalla tiene muchísimas oportunidades que las tenemos que explorar, porque primero es lo que hay que hacer, porque hay que cubrirse si pasa algo parecido. Segundo, yo creo que nos resultará muy enriquecedor. Y tercero, justamente por las dos anteriores, porque nos conviene. Simplemente, y para referirme a la consideración que hizo Eduardo respecto de qué es un periodista, qué es la sociedad civil, etcétera, a mí me parece que nuestras disciplinas en general necesitan un cambio de punto de vista y que aprovechemos este contexto para adoptar y para flexibilizar nuestros puntos de vista. Yo estoy en mi casa y esto es un espacio doméstico, yo estoy formado en urbanismo y a mí me explicaron que hay una línea que se llama rasante que divide el espacio público del espacio privado. No es que cambien las categorías, porque lo público sigue siendo lo público y lo privado sigue siendo lo privado. Pero sin embargo cambian las preguntas, porque yo ahora, ¿dónde estoy si estoy siendo streameado por YouTube? ¿Estoy en mi casa y en mi espacio privado o estoy en un espacio público digital al mismo tiempo? Lo dejo planteado.
Muchísimas gracias, Agustín. Oops, I need to change language. Thank you very much indeed. Some really interesting reflections there. Very impressive that you managed to get 35,000 people to an event. It's true that perhaps this crisis is making us see the possibilities, having discussions like this. So what Anna Maria mentioned earlier about the level of cooperation that's taking place right now. And I think that one of the things we wanted to come out of this webinar are recommendations for the Open Government Partnership, and the idea that governments could significantly scale up their co-creation processes is a really interesting and important one. Also, given how we're all so heavily dependent on the internet, the protection of a right of access to the internet and of net neutrality is clearly something that we should all be working on after this call. And your point about data literacy, media literacy, it's something to include in educational agendas where it hasn't yet been done, for sure. So thank you very much for those reflections. We are super short of time. I'm going to let us run over 10, 12 minutes more so that we can have our wrap-up reflections from Anya. So just to let all the people, we've had about 180 to 200 people who've come in and listened during the course of this call. So not 35,000, but we've had a good number. If you have to go, I totally understand. If it's morning or evening or lunchtime, breakfast, drinks time, whatever it is for you. If you can stay bear with us for another few minutes, that would be excellent. Also, just to repeat that we will gather all the comments and reflections that have been made in the chat and share them with our excellent group of speakers in order that we can perhaps have some more responses to people who had reflections or questions that weren't addressed or answered. And I think that with that, I will pass to Anya. If you can, just give us some thoughts or reflections, Anya, Director of the Open Data Charter, on calling in from London, on what you've heard. Anya, over to you.
Thank you, Helen. And I think you've made my closing remarks much simpler with your seamless moderation and conclusions there. I will be very brief because I know we're over time, but it was interesting to hear how there's some good degree of consensus across the types of challenges that we're facing in an unprecedented time in terms of the demand for information and data. Not necessarily, perhaps I thought it was interesting in seeing a spike in numbers of access to information, but in people wanting to be informed, people understanding what is happening. And I think there was excellent points there of how good communication, working with what you have, these daily briefings that are happening, having journalists being the chance to come in, and then some really concrete suggestions there or innovations on publishing a lot of that information documents straight after the the sessions, including in open formats, as a way to help more people understand what is going on, giving the possibility to in open data community, it's called, we want data to be machine readable, but also we want people to be accessible to people, human readable, perhaps. So I think there's an important point here about establishing those good communications channels, sort of going back to basics. We also had some very heated debates, I think, in terms of how to work with prioritizing data being published or expediting some of the requests. And there were some interesting solutions also in the chat, which I ended up losing track of, because there was just, it seems like a parallel panel going on in our chat room. But about, and I think this brings the nexus of access to information and open data, Helen, which you were talking about in the beginning, really front and center, perhaps a very simple idea of publishing anonymized requests as open data, and maybe identifying those that are most common. Should those be expedited, we would have to turn that back to Eduardo to see if that goes back to the discrimination issue. But there's also, in terms of lessons for lasting change, I thought some very thoughtful points here on taking the actions and the challenges that we're currently facing into opportunities, sort of making lemonade with lemons type of mindset of, while we're have the appetite for collaboration and the collective action that's needed to address this calamity, how can governments, including I would say even this is more relevant in places where there's important legacies of mistrust in government. How can we take that into opportunities to increase transparency, increase collaboration, and increase trust in the citizens and people to public institutions? At the time, while you're building and investing in what you have, building capabilities, data literacy, what does it mean to be data ready? How can we be better prepared in terms of our data infrastructures for the next time or a future crisis? There was a very important point there made by Paul as well on what is that fundamental data, or the building blocks of a data infrastructure fit for crisis that we should be thinking about more in the long term. And a very important point in terms in the chat made as we're thinking about gathering and sharing this data, ensuring that they're addressing the needs of diverse citizens, especially women and gender groups, and those groups that are going to most likely be hit the worst. So I think that there is a need to in the same regards as we don't want to roll things back. We want to maintain the same level or improve levels of transparency. We also want that to be done in ways that consider a diversity of different needs. And finally, just to wrap up, I think we left this perhaps for another discussion, but whether there's the need to revise our current existing norms, information frameworks, are they fit for facing these types of challenges? And I wonder if we can think about designing these norms to be more adaptive, to consider context and the different types of problems or applications that we could face, and then help us think more specifically about where are the potential gaps that we might have within those frameworks. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Anya. It was an excellent overview of some of the points that have been thrown up. Clearly, there's a lot of food for thought here. There are things that we need to carry on reflecting on. Anna Maria, you also put in the chat about the privacy debate. We slightly steered away from that because otherwise we just don't have, in an hour and a half, we don't have time. In order to for our own benefit, for all the work that many of the people on this call, we've got a lot of people who professionally work on the right of access to information on this call. So for all of us, as well as for making recommendations to the Open Government Partnership, we will look in to see whether we can actually continue perhaps a series of structured discussions in order to take some of these reflections forward, whilst at the same time doing some more background work in gathering, compiling the best practices, which we've already been trying to do, the problems and the best practices, in order to be really well informed for our future debates. So that's one thing that I would commit to do. There were other things that we didn't manage to talk about, comments I saw passing about different levels of government and how you can have very good data at the central government level, for example, but very poor data when you come down to a more regional or local level. How do we address that? How does how does information get to certain more vulnerable sectors of society and groups? Because whilst we're talking about the internet and the access to the internet, or Agustin's points, at the same time, not everyone yet has that level of access. So the need to address something like that. In fact, Agustin, you said something which sounded like you were making a reference to the famous, I think it's a famous Maria Benedetti quote, which is just when I had all the answers, they changed the questions. If I got it right. And maybe there's a little bit of that going on as well. We thought we knew the path that we were on, and suddenly a whole lot of new challenges have been thrown up. But as many of you, and thank you all for the speakers for contributing, really some really excellent perspectives and reflections. And I like the way that you all managed to identify the challenges, but also to point to what could be potential opportunities going forward. So I think that on that note, we're going to have, unfortunately, to stop. But I really thank you once again to everyone, to Ana Maria and Eduardo, to Philip, to Toby, to Fernando, Paul, Agustin, and Ania. Thanks again to Bianca and Megan for organizing this. Thanks again. They're a bit, I can't see them like in a normal conference, but I know we have interpreters somewhere in the depths of the system here as well. So thank you very much, as ever. And hope that we can continue this conversation, and hope to see you all again, either like this virtually or possibly when we can hug each other again, for some people in person as well. Stay well, stay safe, and thank you very much. Goodbye.